Hello, friend, and welcome to episode 93 of the Steady On podcast, Embolden. I'm your host, Angie Bauman, and my guest today is author, speaker, and podcaster, Amy Debrucque. Amy's focus is on helping us take steps to conquer fears and insecurities. And I have a question for you to ponder. Is there anything you feel God nudging you towards that you found ways over the past months or even years to talk yourself out of trying? I've been there. I've also been the one living in a state of perpetual motion, doing so many things for God that I didn't have time to hear from God. And one thing I'm learning about myself is that sometimes I stay busy because that's less scary than taking steps in a new direction. Amy shared a verse during our interview that I've claimed as the verse for this episode. It's found in 1 Thessalonians 2:2. Hear it from the Passion Translation. We were emboldened by faith in our God to fearlessly preach his wonderful gospel to you in spite of incredible opposition. As sometimes we preach the good news of Jesus Christ with words, but more often we preach the good news with actions. We reach a hand to someone else and offer something we have to assist them in their journey. But extending that hand often comes with some risk. And so we keep that hand close by our side, don't we? Allowing fear and anxiety to decide for us. Amy spent 15 years of her life bound by fear and anxiety, and it took a cancer diagnosis for her to begin to take steps out of that place and into a place where she made decisions based on the promises of God rather than on her worries. Amy is a work in progress. I am a work in progress. You are a work in progress. But together, we can hear and respond to the call to step out as people emboldened by faith. Let's listen in. Welcome to the Steady On podcast. We are so glad that you're here. I'm Angie Bauman, and with me today is my guest, Amy Debrucque. Amy, welcome to the Steady On community. Thank you for spending a little time with us today.
Thank you, Angie, for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Me too. Amy is a wife and a mom and a cancer survivor, and she is an author and a podcaster. Her podcast is called Life on Purpose, and we're going to spend some time talking about your latest project called Embolden. And I have to say that before I was familiar with your work, I don't know that I'd ever heard the word embolden. And so I was like, that is an interesting word. Like, I think I know what it means, but I was interested in learning more about what it means. So would you just tell us a little bit about this passion that you have and the reason that you would title a book project, Embolden?
Well, that's a great question, actually. I do get asked that quite a bit. And one of the reasons after we created Embolden, which is an encouragement journal for women. Although I've had men read it as well, but it was, the pictures are definitely more geared for women, that we wanted to give it a name that, that kind of immediately gave the feeling of being confident or courageous or brave. And so, we went through the gamut. And we came across Embolden, and Embolden is in the Bible. And so I thought, you know what? We loved it. It just was like a perfect godly fit. So that's where it came from. And it's really means to give someone the courage or confidence to act or behave in a certain way. And so, that's kind of what we're hoping that Embolden actually does in someone's life.
How is Embolden used in the Bible?
Well, one is that we really like is First Thessalonians 2:2 says, the Spirit of God emboldens us to proclaim the gospel without fear. So that's one. There are a few different ones in there, but they all kind of relate about really being bold in our faith walk. And so that's really kind of what the takeaway is from Embolden as you work through the journal, is to really have Christ embolden you in your life. And if you're a first-time Christian or you're not a Christian at all, we also wanted to be able to set somebody up to want to learn more, to want to know about the love of Christ and how you can walk confidently with him, especially in today's world when I think that there is a lot of fear and anxiety. And And if you don't have that belief system, what a great opportunity to start now.
So I know that the journal really does encourage people, especially if they're struggling with fear and insecurity and anxiety. And so do you see bravery? You use that word already. And this word emboldened, do you see that as kind of the opposite of fear and anxiety? Is that what you're hoping? Is that your hope with the message, that you can sort of encourage people to walk in a different lane, if you will?
Yes, definitely. And we did that really intentionally based off of our own experiences. I co-wrote this with my oldest daughter, and one of the lines that I actually use a lot in writing and speaking is, fear is normal, but courage gets the final say. And I think that, you don't want to hang on those fears, because I know from somebody who lived with severe anxiety for years, that what a burden that is, number one, and how it really does steal the joy in being able to live your life. And so I know you had mentioned, host the podcast Life on Purpose. Well, Life on Purpose is if you say it slow enough, it's literally that. It's actually living on purpose. And I think sometimes, and I know for myself, when I was in experiencing and living in fear all the time and anxiety, you do the opposite. You're not living on purpose. You're just getting through each day. You're going through the motion, and you miss so much. I missed so much when my kids were little because I was so fearful and had so much anxiety. One of the reasons for that was not only just, a growth that I needed to do with myself and my faith walk, but also I kept quiet. And that was to my disadvantage. I think if I was able to, or had been able to share a little bit more and set my pride aside, that it would have fostered more fellowship with people who could have maybe gotten me to a place to work through a journal like this. And, because, there's a few things that happen. And like I said, this whole book, for my daughter and I setting it up, was so intentional to us because, we all have personalities similar to other people out into the world. And so, but I do think a lot of times in the Christian community, when you hear a lot about community and fellowship and all of that is wonderful and so important. But I think sometimes we forget that sometimes it's people don't just not do it because they're not interested. Sometimes they just don't have the confidence to do it, or the confidence in themselves to do it. And so we wanted this journal to be something that if you're that person, after going through this, maybe that'll give you that little extra boost you needed to feel confident to, sign up for something, or, get out of your comfort zone. We're big into this book and getting out of our comfort zone because, comfort is wonderful until it keeps you stagnant. And then it's not so great anymore. It's that security blanket. But if you're counting on your comfort, then you're not really counting on God. And that was really my whole experience. And my daughter was at the beginning of feeling that way. And that's why we created it together. We wanted to make sure that women of all ages could really kind of get a hold of that sooner than maybe I did, at 40, and really kind of reach them as early as we possibly can.
I have a couple of things I want to circle back based on some of the things you were just saying. So much good stuff in there. I think comfort can be an idol for us. You were just saying that about comfort. I think there's so many times that actually our choice is between choosing comfort and choosing walking in the Spirit. Even if I'll say that living life on purpose, I think is so much leaning into the leading of the Holy Spirit, but it's scary because we can't see from A to Z, right? When we do that. And so we'll just no, I think I can serve God and stay in this comfortable place. And we can, and we do, because there's truth in that too. But there are some things that we definitely miss because there's something so beautiful that happens when we step out to do something that we're not 100% sure we can do, but we are 100% sure that God's calling us that direction. Right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's definitely scary. I mean, we're not taking the fear factor out of it. We're just taking the, trust God, to trust yourself to do it, to make that step. And like you said, I mean, once you do it, it almost becomes a little bit of a slow domino effect. Once you can see yourself like, okay, this was like, your labored breathing. We always joke like that, when if you have to speak or you're showing up and your bundle of nerves and the whole 9 yards. But once you've done it, it's like, I just did something hard. And I think a lot of times too, as women, we kind of disqualify some things that we might think might not be considered hard to someone else as still being hard to us. And that we really need to kind of acknowledge that as an obedient win when we do it. Everybody's comfort level is different. And so, for us being more introverted, things that seem very basic to maybe the extrovert and who's got her hands in all kinds of community stuff, it may seem minimal. And I think sometimes too, we forget that that's still important, and we have to just keep going with that. And our journey in fellowship is going to look entirely different from the next woman's. And that's okay, as long as we're being obedient and we're just taking that brave step, even when it feels painful, because sometimes it can be painful.
Yes. And I hear you saying emboldened in one person doesn't look the same as emboldened in another person.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think that's just because we're all wired so differently, and we all have different strengths, which is wonderful. And we all have different weaknesses. And so, but I think the most important thing is just being able to use the Bible and Scripture as a resource. I think we look sometimes for all these resources, we're very, and I'm this person as well, very interested in, how I can be better and how I can do this better. And, we get a little bit caught up. And I do think sometimes even the self-help and the affirmations can become idols. But if we're using the Bible as that self-help resource, I think it just shifts the perspective a little bit and can really kind of help foster that confidence, because he's already rooting for you. He's already has confidence in you, even when we don't have it in ourselves. And so there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me ask you something else you said earlier. You mentioned about staying quiet in your time of anxiety was, for you, you realized, a form of pride. Would you talk about that just a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, I was that person. So I had two major tragedies by the time I was 26. I had my oldest brother had passed away, and our firstborn son had passed away just within a matter of 16 days of each other.
Oh my.
And so, because at that time I still considered myself to be an immature Christian, and we can talk more about that after if you want, I was trying to do what you mentioned earlier. I was trying to still be driving the car and just let God being in the passenger seat. And so, and you can only do that for so long. And so I did that because I wasn't reaching out, because I was embarrassed that I couldn't fix myself. I had a lot of shame with that and a lot of pride, because I thought that I could fix myself, that without consciously saying, I don't need you, God, I was, and I was just talking about this weekend. We don't necessarily intentionally take God out of our lives or exclude him, but when we don't intentionally include him, that's when we've got a problem. And that's what I did. And so I thought, whatever I needed to do, I was going to do to fix my anxiety, and it didn't work. It was 15 years. And then at 40, it was a long time. And so, that's one of the reasons too, is I think the more we can be vulnerable and share now, I mean, at that time I would have never I didn't want to tell anybody because it was so embarrassing. I'm like, I'm an intelligent person. I'm strong. And to me, that was a weakness, and I didn't like it. And the problem is, it wasn't a weakness. The strength would have been to just lean into God and have him help me. But at the time, I was the God. Right. I wanted to be able to do it.
So I'm going to guess then that this idea of being an immature Christian and kind of saying to God, I don't need you, kind of goes together, right? And that maturing process is about what you were just saying, intentionally inviting him in. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that fair to say that maturing process was about intentionally inviting him in?
Yes, definitely intentionally inviting him in.
And what is that? Yeah,
Oh,
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
what does that look like? Yeah, intentionally
Yeah,
inviting him in. Yeah.
and how that would actually be any different than what I was doing before. And so for me, the shift in my immature faith as to more a mature one, or the road to it, you're never fully matured, I don't feel like, was surrendering. So when I did turn 40, I had I received a cancer diagnosis, and it was at that moment I got it finally. Everything finally clicked, and I was like, you know what, God, I can't do it. I can't do it, and I don't want to do it anymore. It was exhausting, and I just surrendered it to him. And so that was the beginning, because then I understood, okay, I've always identified as a Christian, but if I don't make a change, what's the difference? And so once I actually let it go, let all this burden of trying to control my health, my kids' health, every situation, and just every concern that would be like a minor thing, it would spiral to times 1,000 of something horrible that could happen. And once I stopped doing that, because I wouldn't let myself go there, I would just, if something would come up, I would just have to go to him, go into his word. That was the difference. And I think that I don't want to mislead anybody here either by saying that, that's the be all end all. That's a daily struggle. That's a daily act of obedience for me. I have that tendency to be a worrier. And so I have to give it up to God every day. But it's something intentional that I'm doing as opposed to not doing.
So I want to ask you what that looks like, maybe a little bit more specifically, because I love practical things, for our friends that are dealing with anxiety. And we all deal with anxiety. I really believe we do. I used to think I didn't deal with anxiety very much because I wasn't anxious the way I thought anxious was. And over time, the Lord has just really helped me understand this is what anxious is for you. This is what it feels like for you, And so I think we all deal with it in a variety of different ways. But you said you keep giving it back to God, or you go into his word. And so do you have familiar things that you look for to remind you of promises, or do you have a reading plan, or kind of what is that when you're like, hey, I feel that anxiety rising, I need to spend a minute of, intentional surrender and inviting him in? What's that like for Amy?
Honestly, for me, when it's that high, when I feel like it could be the potential of something to run away in my mind, or, my heart, or whatever, I'm kind of at the point where, maybe it's because I'm getting older and I don't really care anymore of image and all of that, but I get on my knees now, and I just say, you know what, God, whatever it's going to be, I'm leaving it up to you. And I think I probably could have said that before, but I don't know if I would have actually meant it. And I don't know if just the circumstances in general, or just my faith, or the whole process has led me to that point. But I just finally had to reconcile with the fact that I need to be okay with whatever he allows in my life, that I'm going to be okay with it. And it was really, it's more of a mind shift. And so those are really the practices when something comes up. It's the prayer to that. I don't have any special prayer. I mean, I do devotions every day and all of that, just to stay current in, different teachings and at different times of the year. But to me, when those things present themselves, that's my go-to. I go to very basic. It's not anything complicated. I'm just, God, I'm trusting you first. And that was something that I didn't do. I had a trust issue for sure.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because I talk a lot about having a plan, because, when we have hard stories, when we have things, when we know we have anxiety, when we have trauma that raises its ugly head, those things, it's going to come. We're going to have days where we struggle, where it gets hard. And I think it's so important for us to know that about ourselves, and to say, okay, this is what I do when that happens, because I think then we feel more emboldened to deal with it. Do we not? And I love what you said about kneeling, because I think for I think this is true for me. There is something about posture that makes my heart or my brain or something take notice and shift. And so it doesn't have to be kneeling, but if there's some kind of act of surrender, this is what surrender looks like in my physical body. I think that sends our heart, our spirit, our brain a message, that says, this is what we do, that makes these anxious feelings, these fear, these insecurities, when the same one's coming up again, dissipate.
Right. Well, I totally agree. I mean, that was the first thing I did when I had that diagnosis. And I was kind of just like, I'm at the end of my rope here. And I physically surrendered. And I think that there is something to be said for that. I think it's just like, this fear is defeating me, but your trust is what's going to give me the strength. And so I needed to, and I still do at times, to get down on my knees. And that's obviously a personal thing, and I'm not saying that that's everybody's road to surrender. But for me, I totally agree with you. I think that there's something about the posture in that is really profound.
Yeah. And find your thing, I just encourage the listener to do that, because I think I know there is something that we can do, and it might change as our seasons and our circumstances change. But what's the thing that these are the breathing exercises. This is the verse that I return to. This is the posture of my body, that helps you move from that sort of soul chaos that I call it, to a place of greater peace. What was it, Amy, about the cancer diagnosis? Do you think, was it wrestling with your own mortality? Was it losing control of your time schedule, or what was it you think that kind of was a breaking point for you with this?
I definitely think it was my own mortality, in the sense that I had been worrying about my own mortality since my brother and son had passed away.
Gotcha.
To it, and so that was the underlying cause of my anxiety. And so I kind of felt like, even though throughout those 15 years, God had sent me a million signs and signals that I just wasn't willing to pick up on. Yeah. But in that moment of the diagnosis, I felt like, okay, this is it. This is what I've been waiting
for has arrived, almost. Yeah.
I've been waiting for this moment. And so it was almost like I heard God say to me, it's here. So what are you going to do? Are you going to finally trust me or not? And it was that. It sounds so probably ridiculous because it was so simple, but it was that simple for me at that point. And I think because I had struggled for so long, and it was so physically and mentally exhausting, that I was like, I'm done. I'm trusting you.
How is your health now?
My health is great. I just had my 10-year mark in May. So I'm 10 years out, and it was a Hodgkin's lymphoma. I know people ask me that as well, diagnosis. And I'm grateful.
Good. So I'm going to switch topics just a little bit. I want to talk about your daughter, because you mentioned earlier that this project, this Emboldened journal, was co-written with your daughter. What was that like for you, that journey of writing with her?
It was hard sometimes.
I bet.
But she's great. I mean, I always say leaps and bounds ahead of I was at that age. And so I'm grateful for that. But it was hard. It was hard and easy. It was hard in the sense more of scheduling. She was a sophomore in college, and, I do this full time. And so that was kind of hard. And also, she and I are very similar in the, not wanting to, our first reaction isn't wanting to let the world know our shortcomings and insecurities. And so part of it was easier for me just because of my age and what I've gone through. And so it was a little bit of a harder journey for her, which I could totally understand and appreciate. But I think the conversations and the way we set it up and really worked through it together, I think it was a healing process for both of us.
Great. That's so good. So I know you've mentioned a couple of things from the Bible already that have been important in your work, but I just wonder, in your life in general, or with this project, with your podcast, is there a verse as you deal with your own anxiety and insecurities that we all have, a verse, a passage, a character, a story, anything like that, Amy, that just is something that you're like, this is something I hold on to. This is something I connect with. It gives me a lot of hope, and I remember God's promises through it.
Probably, I would say my favorite verse is Proverbs 27:17, which is as iron sharpens iron, so one man or person sharpens another. And I think that that's just been my whole faith growing experience. And it's just impacted me in such a way. And again, I think has emboldened me and continues to want me to embolden somebody else, because I think that's just so important when you have people in your life. We have a lot of yes people in our lives, but I also think it's so important to have people that just sharpen you and sometimes call you out, even if it's uncomfortable. I mean, it doesn't have to be in a rude way, and I'm not encouraging that by any means. There is a way to deliver something in a loving way, to really, for someone to interpret as they're doing this for my own good, or they're saying this for my own good, or my growth, or whatever it is. So that's probably my favorite scripture, because I think it's just really how we should all be living, with that idea of sharpening somebody else. And I just love that.
Yeah. There's a verse that reminds me of a verse. I think it's in Hebrews. I'll look it up and put it in the show notes. That talks about how we should spur one another on to good deeds. And I studied that word a while back. That's spur. And it's really like an agitation, like a stirring up, like a competitiveness in a good way. I hear that in that Proverbs verse too, where it's like with our lives, we should almost agitate people to want to do more with their lives, to be more emboldened,
Right.
And I love that. It's a high calling, though. I think it's challenging. It's easier for us to be the yes man. But then sometimes we can actually talk people out of their own emboldened leading into the Holy Spirit moment, right? Because we're like, oh no, that I agree with you. That does sound scary.
Right. Absolutely.
Yes, it is. Don't do that. That's too risky, right?
Right. Well, I think it's, I think that there's a happy medium there. I think it's an encouragement, but also something where we should maybe praying together as whether in fellowship or just encouraging that person to be in prayer over it, and have them break down, their reasons, or, where this came from and all of that. So I think there's different practical ways to do it. But yes, I think it's hard, especially when you do care and love about people. Sometimes I think it's easier to, want to sharpen somebody you don't know, because you don't have any attachment to them. It's harder with the people that we do know, because we don't want to see them not step into something that maybe God has waiting for them. And, but sometimes it's hard, if they're not ready, and we don't want to push them either. So I think that it's a learning process, a learning curve. But I think if you're with people that know you at your core and can trust you, I think that's a very fast way to also really kind of evaluate friendships and relationships, and maybe how they are categorized. I have a very small, tight knit group of women, my daughter included, my oldest daughter. And I think that it's really one of the wonderful things about it is we all have different opinions at times and different things like that. And sometimes we get on each other's nerves, because that's what you do when you're just around people more than, normal. But I think because we all know each other's core values, and just there's an underlying love behind everything, even with that annoyance at times or whatever it is, that you can get past your own hurt feelings for 5 minutes if something has been said, and then really kind of think about it in a more positive way. Like, okay, well, what are they trying to tell me here? And what am I maybe not wanting to hear?
Yeah. I have a very good friend also. I was thinking of her as you were talking just now, because we've been friends for over 20 years, and she's so supportive of me. And there have been so many ways she's demonstrated her support of me. And I can remember a few times, I'll get emotional just saying this, but I can remember a few times when I was like sort of in one lane, if you will, and her words have lovingly said, from my point of view, I think that's the wrong lane. I think your attitude about it, or your decision about it, or something is more self-serving than Jesus serving, or whatever. And the reason it makes me emotional is because she's so choosy, I guess. Like, I know when she says something like that to me, she is coming from a place that she actually does very much support me, and she loves the Lord, and she believes, and so I listen to that, and I go back to that, the iron sharpens iron, because it's through her love for me that she does that. And so there's that, again, it's that trust relationship and some of the people that you're having those kind of conversations with too. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I love that. Yeah. So this has been fantastic. I love talking to you. I love this idea of being emboldened and being able to overcome so many of the things that the enemy would use to hold us back, and to not to encourage us not to step out or to share or to take a risk even, and follow a Holy Spirit leading. And I'm wondering, before I let you go, would you give us just a little glimpse into your life? You've talked about a regular devotion time and a couple of scriptures that mean a lot to you. But right now, what are you watching or listening to, reading? What's in your earbuds on your nightstand? We just love to know what's keeping you connected to God right now.
Well, actually, I've been listening to quite a few books. I just finished Lisa Whittle's, and I've actually, which was outstanding, The Hard Good. If anybody hasn't read that yet, it's such a powerful book. I've also been listening to, her name is Rosaria. I'm drawing blank now on her last name, but I've been listening to her audiobook, just talking about different ways of hospitality and fellowship, and how important that is in communities that even look different from ours, and how to really kind of still engage with them in a godly and loving way. I'm reading the book of Revelation, made plain and clear. A pastor at a church that I'm attending actually wrote this, and he's got a workbook with it. So I'm super excited. Give him a little shout out here.
I love it. Yes.
Yeah, it's a great book, and it's just
Revelation, plain and clear, seems like something that doesn't go together. So that's exciting.
Well, and that's the one, and that was the reason he did it. And he has this amazing workbook, is to kind of just work through what that looks like. Because I think when people think of Revelations, it's like
very daunting. Yes.
Yeah, it's very daunting. Mm-hmm. But really, the way it's laid out isn't. And so I've just started going through this, and I'm super excited. I love it. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I love that. And I will find those things and link them all in today's show notes, because like I said, I love to share resources. So let me just remind you that Amy is at her book is Embolden: Brave Steps to Help You Conquer Fears and Insecurities. She's at amydebrucque.com, which I will link in today's show notes. And it's just been, yay, beautiful cover. I love the cover of the book. Yeah, it's gorgeous. Yeah. So it's been a delight to have you, Amy, today. Thank you so much for spending this time with us and encouraging us with your word.
Well, thank you, Angie. It was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
And thank you, friend, for listening. Until next time, peace. Thank you, Amy, for sharing pieces of your story and for encouraging us to intentionally include God in our decisions. And thank you for providing an illustration of kneeling before the Lord when anxiety threatens to overtake us, in order to be emboldened by the power of the Holy Spirit. 1 Thessalonians 2:2 again, this time from the Message. We were sure of ourselves in God and went right ahead and said our piece, presenting God's message to you, defiant of the opposition. How will you defy your opposition and present God's message to others today? Next week, my dear ministry friend Jody Nisnik will be in the house, and we're going to be talking about how the life of Joseph in the book of Genesis can help us persevere through life's challenges. Jody is an amazing Bible teacher, and you will not want to miss it. If you'd like to support the ministry of Steady On, there are 3 things you can do, and they're all free. First, you can subscribe to the podcast. That helps a ton. Second, you can rate and review this podcast, because that helps other people find us. And lastly, you can subscribe to my weekly newsletter by visiting the website livesteadyon.com and clicking the orange newsletter button at the top. The link for that is also in today's show notes. I always welcome comments and feedback, so please feel free to reach out to me anytime by emailing steadyonpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. I pray wherever your day takes you, you are walking in the confident knowledge that you are a beloved, cherished child of God. Peace.